Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to the session. So this talk is pretty well jam-packed, and I apologize about that because I know probably there's going to be a lot of interest in Q&A and dialogue after the talk, and unfortunately it's pretty jam-packed. So what I'll tell you is I'm going to be here all day today. I'll be here tomorrow. I would love to chat with you guys about anything that you want to talk about with this project. I just want to warn you though. You know those dolls where you pull the string and it talks and the string? Yeah. I'm like, you pull the string and it's like an infinite string, like I just won't shut up about it. So, you know, if you want to talk, just be warned. I'll go on for a while. But I really am passionate about this project, and I think the results will kind of convince you that it's worth thinking about in a serious way. So my name is Brian Palmer, math instructor at Hartnell College. We're in Salinas, which is the Monterey Bay, little bite taken on California. We're in the south corner of that little bite taken out of the middle of California. In our Learning Lab application, I started out our application with this quote taken from the book Make It Stick by Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel. Elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning by expressing it in your own words and connecting it with what you already know. If you practice elaboration, there's no known limit to how much you can learn. And this was kind of like one of the theses that I had going into this project, that interviews are potentially a way of kind of developing this sort of practice among students. And it was just a thought. It was a proposed idea. And as we went through the project, I think that it really was borne out in the experience, that it really serves that purpose for students. I have a treat for you guys. We've got quite a few student testimonials. And so this testimonial in particular, it's a real treat. This is from one of Nina Vasquez's students. Nina's right here. And so this is Rebecca Linares. And in giving multiple versions of this talk at different places, I've gotten to listen to this little testimonial of hers multiple times. It never gets old. So let me turn the volume down. It's kind of loud at the moment. Oh, that'd be great.
And then she said, from these problems, you will choose one, or the computer will choose one, and you will present it. I said, okay. So I had to practice all of them. Okay, so I did on paper. And you can say I finished, but how do I know I got it right? What if I present that and it's wrong? So that's when I took it to the lab and I showed it to the tutors around there, and they would help me, fix this, fix that, okay. Once I did that, I saw people I recognized, and I'm like, hey, how are you gonna present your interview? And they started doing it. And I would hear what they're saying, because it's different just saying it all in your head than saying it out loud. I would hear what they're saying and I guess take tips from what they're saying, or what not to do. I would pick up from what to do, what not to do. And then, what about you? They would tell me. It's like, okay. So then I would go up and we would practice. Without even knowing, we would be practicing for the interview. So then come day of, I did it here, I did it here, and I did it here, and I did it here, So it just feels, and she's very welcoming. I didn't feel, the fact that she's my teacher wasn't like, oh, no. It was just like, oh, hey, and let's do it again, and this is this, and this means this. But yeah, there was a lot of written practice with others, but it's actually really cool. Because you're all there. You are all there. Like, you're there. You have to do it. You have to explain it. And maybe even answer her questions. You have to know what you're doing, literally. So Miss Vasquez does long quizzes where it's just questions of whatever we're learning. And that quiz, I couldn't get it. I couldn't, because reasonably, you would want to pass a quiz before you do the exam. So I remember I couldn't get it. And I said, oh, sorry. That's like when I was telling you about that. I was like, yeah, it's okay. I didn't pass it, the quiz. I was like, I'll just do the interview like that. And same thing, well, we saw the results. But eventually I passed it. The interview, I studied for the interview. I learned it. I did it. I passed it. And then I went back to the quiz. And I got it. I remember I was doing the quiz. I was like, why was this so hard? But that was after the interview. Because I got to explain it. I got to practice it and everything. And then I went back to the quiz and I was like nothing. I was like, what happened there?
Wow.
But that was before the interview. Same situation, same quiz, before and after. That's where I clearly saw the effect of the interview. I was like, I really learned it after.
So we got more. We got more. It's not working at the moment.
And then,
All right, yeah, so meet the team. So I'm the co-PI, Dr. Morehouse, Jennifer Morehouse, she's here as well. She was a permanent contributor. We had Nina Vasquez and then Leticia Contreras and Nicholas Pasquale were our contributors. So basically kind of setting the stage on how I see, like, the real value that I see in interviews is basically, you know, we have limited time with our students, and our job as teachers is to kind of move students through the progression of fluency as far as possible, right? In the short amount of time that we have, how can we sort of accelerate students' learning to be from, you know, the crawling speed that they come in at to ideally like running speed by the end of the class, right? So a couple different ways to think about fluency. So there's, you know, different like parts of learning, right? So language is kind of like the first step where you have to establish language so you can communicate with each other, right? From language, you start to build your repertoire of facts, and then you start to notice relationships between those facts. And then you build hierarchies on, you know, well, this comes after this and it's related to this in this way, right? So you're kind of building those hierarchies. Ultimately, you want students to build models, mental models of the curriculum. And ultimately, like you know, the highest level of fluency would be you have a whole view of the entire theory of calculus or the theory of relativity or whatever, right? Another way of thinking about this sort of like moving students through this progression of early fluency to later fluency is knowledge compression. So if you think about a student coming into a math class, the early algebra that students learn is very challenging to them, right? PEMDAS, distributive law, you know, double negatives give you a positive and three negatives give you a negative, and negative squared becomes a positive. All these things are very complicated for a student early on. Over time, they start to you know, compress that knowledge, and what seemed like this very taxing, very challenging material early on, it gets compressed. Mathematics is highly compressible, right? To where all that gets compressed down, and ultimately you think, well, that's just algebra. Double negative, of course that's a positive. A negative squared, of course that's a positive, right? And so these spots that you're seeing here, this is working memory. So, you know, 3-4 slots of working memory, you have to kind of fill those things with the requisite background knowledge that you need to tackle a problem. And so the more you can compress that knowledge, the fewer of those spots in working memory that it takes up, and that frees up your ability to work on more complicated material, right? So a couple different ways to think about like our role as teachers is to kind of move our students through this progression. And so kind of a central thesis of this project is that interview exams may serve as a tool to accelerate students' progression from earlier forms of fluency to those more advanced forms of fluency. So we're going to see some results, testimonials, and things like that that I think make the case that they really work this way. So pedagogically speaking, the interview exams project, the foundation of it is two kind of pedagogical pillars, so to speak. So the testing effect is the effect that students retain what they've been tested on. They're more fluent in what they've been tested on. What they've been tested on, they tend to be more flexible with that material. It's not about rote learning, right? It's not about saying 2 times 3 = 6. It's about, it really does become more personal to them. It's more meaningful to them after they've been tested on it. So it's not about rote. So the testing effect, it appears in multiple different levels in our courses, right? So homework is an early form of testing. It's like, okay, we did a lesson. Why don't you guys go home and practice and see what you've retained from the lesson? So, you know, early form of testing. Quizzes, you're starting to, you know, take the training wheels off a little bit, and students have to kind of perform a little bit more. Chapter exams, unit exams, very stressful. Students are really preparing for them. They're switched on, right? They're really motivated. And so a way of thinking about interviews is it's kind of like that next level of testing, where it's basically, you know, using that testing effect at sort of an even deeper and higher level than even like unit chapter exams. So it's like that next step. The other sort of like pedagogical pillar of the interview exams project is this protege effect and the retention pyramid. So the protege effect is that effect that I think everyone in this room has had, especially as teachers, where you're explaining something and you may not have even realized it wasn't clear, and you explain it, and then all of a sudden a light bulb goes off and you realize like, oh, now I get it, like in a whole new way, like I understand it even better than before. And so that process of like, you're explaining something and the light bulb goes off, that's the protege effect. The retention pyramid, you can see here, I'm not sure how accurate these numbers are. I've seen them at various places on the web. The numbers always seem pretty consistent. You're going to retain about 5% of what you hear in a lecture, 10% of what you read. You're going to retain 20% from audio visual. And so you go down the pyramid and these practices here, basically you're going to retain more and more. And you can see the foundation of the pyramid, teaching others, you're going to retain the most. And so here's the thing about us as teachers is we are the ones teaching, which means we are the ones who are doing the most learning. Right? And so to me, our responsibility is how can we reverse the roles to some extent, or not to a large extent, so that our students get to benefit from this really powerful teaching effect, the protege effect, right? And so, the way the interviews for most teachers at Hartnell, the way they worked is the magic was in the preparation. Students would go to our tutorial center, it's the Panther Learning Lab. They'd go to the Panther Learning Lab, they'd study together, big study groups, 10 people all working on a whiteboard together. That's the whole point, is to get them teaching, right? We're gonna see one more slide here. The Feynman technique, we talked about this in one of our PDs for the interview exams project. Feynman, who's well known for his not just his teaching, but also his research, right? He's a Nobel Prize winning physicist. And what made him so good, and this is him speaking, it's not me saying this. This is Feynman saying what made him so good was his teaching. And what he would do is, he's trying to learn something, so he'd do some research, reading, whatever, and then he would try and teach it to someone. And by someone, that meant everyone. Feynman was well known for explaining problems to waiters and waitresses, or to his 8-year-old children or whatever, right? And so he would literally try to teach anyone and everyone about the problem that he was working on. And through that process, you start to uncover holes in your knowledge. And you can then say, okay, wait, now I'm starting to see what I'm missing here, whatever, right? So he would go through this process, and then of course you go back to the top, try and reteach it. And every time you go through that cycle, you're going to start to understand more of what you don't understand and start filling those holes, right? You don't have to read these slides in detail. This is basically my homework for the next year, because I want to keep moving on this project. So in terms of like, where does the testing effect and the protege effect, where does it come from, like in the brain, like what's going on? So after doing some reading, basically you have active retrieval, engaging the hippocampus. You have the prefrontal cortex. Don't let me give you the impression that I know what I'm talking about. This is all, like, everything I know about the brain is on these 2 slides. That's right, I'm teaching, so I can figure out what I don't know. So executive function, metacognition, the prefrontal cortex. Now this right here, the anterior cingulate cortex, cognitive conflict and resolution. This I think is big. This is one of the key features of the interview exams process, is since students are having to explain themselves and they're uncovering all these conflicts, I think that's where a lot of these like aha moments are coming from. It's something you didn't pick up on before, and you're trying to explain it, and then all of a sudden something clicks, right? Dopaminergic response. So dopamine, of course, drives your motivation and reward seeking and everything. And then increase in long-term potentiation. So basically prepares the ground for neurological, so it makes your neurons more plastic and prepares the ground for long-term learning. So there's also some hormonal influences. So during interview exams, there is a cortisol response, there is an adrenaline response. It is stressful, there's a dopamine release. And those are like pathways for that long-term retention process as well. So lots of interesting things that I'm kind of looking into more to kind of understand this at sort of like a neurological level. But just thinking about what we've heard so far, I have another testimony here. This is Yaire on the left and Maria on the right, and they're going to talk about, so like I said before, the real magic of the interview exams process is the preparation sessions, the the very sort of like, I don't think of it as high stakes, but I think the students think of it as high stakes. To be in a room with your instructor, having to explain this content to the expert, I think they think of it as high stakes. It really motivates them to prepare. So the magic is in the preparation. And so you can think about the protege effect, the testing effect in the context of this little interview here.
I would basically, for me, I would have to go over what I was thinking. I was like, no, it's so the way I'm doing stuff, it's this way and this way and this way, and this it's because of this, and here are like the rules, and we would bring like our notes and stuff. But then she would be like, no, it's this way because of this, and this. So then that's when everyone else would come in and they would pitch in like their knowledge, and we would be like, oh no, yeah, like it's that way. So I don't know, it's just really fun, and I think it's very enjoyable, like having a group and actually working out a problem.
And I honestly feel it made us like closer, like going through those problems, staying after. Like there were some points where it would just be like 2 out of the 5 or 3 out of the 5 in our group that we would stay after. Some people had right in front of us.
And then recalling everything made it easier for us to use in other problems as well.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I remember this from class. Oh no, he said this because of this. So then we would, I don't know, it just sticks to you more. You have to work through every single step, and you have to start from the most basic stuff. Like, for example, just explaining like, oh, so what does continuity mean? Like, just like the simple, like start from all the way from the top all the way to the end. And sometimes we would be there for like 4 hours and stuff, but it wouldn't feel like 4 hours. It would just go, like time would go fly by. Because when I'm studying for a test, I'm like repeating the problems, but it's just me. Even if I have someone, it's like you don't have that commitment of other people, like getting together.
The exchange, the dialogue, right?
Just to like being that other people are counting on me, or maybe not just myself, right? But like I have a group that I have to work with, so it makes me want to work.
And it wasn't just one person putting in the work. It was like everyone had to know what we were doing. So if they didn't understand, we would have to explain it. And if they didn't understand it from me, then she would explain it, and they would be like, oh yeah, I get it now.
There's more. Where are we?
I would basically, for me.
Oh, yeah, there we go. So, moving into, I don't know how controversial it's going to be, but potentially somewhat controversial. But I think it really is at the heart of this project as well. So reframing examinations. In working with Nina, we presented at the online teaching conference in June. It was a really nice experience. And working with Nina, we got to delve into some of the very like extensive equity work that she's been doing over the past several years. She shared this slide with me from the Escala Institute, talking about the history of assessment practices. And so 1600s, Harvard used an oral exit interview to award a degree. 1832, Yale started to use a 4-point scale to rank students without disclosing to students to thwart unhealthy competition. 1898, women were invited to higher education at Mount Holyoke, and the modern grading system as a sorting mechanism was born. And so this to me is kind of like the legacy that we've inherited, that you know, we have a 4-point system, we have a sorting and ranking system, and we have inherited the system, but there's no reason that we have to, like, how stuck are we really with this 4-point system? So keep this in the back of your mind. I have things that we're going to talk about. So let's look at the common attitudes around exams. And I'm not saying that any of these are right or wrong. I'm just saying let's kind of like compile some common attitudes. So I worked with a woman at UCSC. She was in someone's class, and he said, if anyone so much as looks up during an exam, you will receive an F on your exam. And she said that she was sitting there watching, proctoring the students, and they're sitting there writing, thinking, and then they look up, like, and then they, oh my God, realize that they're looking at us, and then like tuck their head back down. So tests are meant to be an assessment of student learning, right? So obviously, if students are looking on each other's tests, you're not getting an accurate assessment of how much they've learned, right? If students cheat off of each other, then obviously you're not getting a true measurement of their learning. there's this idea of formative assessment on the one hand versus summative assessment. So I think this is more common in the K-12 world, but formative assessment, the idea that you kind of give quizzes and things like that to kind of help build students' understanding and figure out what they're strong with and what they need to practice. And so you can kind of help them understand where they're at in the learning cycle. And then at the end, you give them a final exam or a chapter exam or unit exam to say like, okay, so what all have you learned, right? And then last, common attitude around the exam is that we need exams who can kind of rank students, say, who's getting an A, who's getting a B. And again, none of that is right or wrong, just kind of cataloging some common ideas around exams. And so here's kind of an alternative, again, kind of rethinking, we've inherited the system, but do we really have to, honor this system that we've just been born into? Pedagogical research has found that learning is more robust and longer lasting when it is effortful. So thinking back to the dialogue with Yaide and Maria and how hard they were working, that literally 4-hour study sessions that they would just fly by and all the dialogue and everything, right? Students benefit from desirable difficulties during the learning process, including quizzes and exams. The testing effect, like we've talked about, the documented increase in retention and proficiency for topics that students were tested on. And so if you kind of think through, through this framework, we start to see that assessment doesn't necessarily need to be a ranking and sorting tool. You can use it as pedagogy, assessment as pedagogy, right? And this bullet point here, formative versus summative assessment, is a false construct. And instead, all assessment is formative. You should always be trying to build these ideas in students' minds, right? So even with the final exam for Calc 1 is a formative experience for Calc 2. The final exam for a stats class is formative experience for a psychological methods class, whatever, right? So, you can always think of assessment as a formative process. So this alternative framework, so summative assessment, it's like, here we're at the end of the semester and we're going to give a final exam and you got 90 and you're an A and you got 80 and above and you're a B and you got 70 and above, you're a C. And contrast that with assessment as a teaching and learning tool. It's not about a finish line. It's a journey. There's highs and there's lows and there's experiences and there's connections, there's friendships, there's challenges and there's successes. And to me, the diagram on the right is much more authentic, much closer to real life. I mean, races are cool, winning a medal, that's great, it's exciting, you're going to remember it for a long time. But in terms of like, what are we trying to prepare our students for? We had a big discussion in our session this morning about soft skills and about, we need to teach our students content, but at the same time, they need to work in teams. They need to know how to communicate with each other. And you're going to get that under a more formative, group-based, dialogue-driven experience than just here's the final exam, 90 and above is an A, 80 and above is a B, and so on, right? So just a little bit of background here. The way I do my interviews, it's a group interview. I have the students, I give the students the questions well in advance, like weeks in advance. I'll bring the students in on the day of the interview and I pick one random person to present one random question. So when Yaide and Maria were talking about how they couldn't leave anybody behind, that's because the way the interview is set up, everyone has to know the problems really well because the grade, partially, there's catches there. I support the students, so it's not like a winner take all type of thing where how one student doesn't determine the whole grade, but it's dependent on how one student does. So they really have to support each other. And so when Joshua talks about his experiences, just keep that in the back of your mind that everyone in the group has to know these problems really well. And so you'll kind of hear some echoes of that in his testimony.
We're in a classroom that's like it's in a STEM field.
One more.
The class size?
Class size, up to about 45 or so. Yeah, community college, so they're not giant classes.
And how many are in the group?
So depends, but 4 or 5 usually per group. Yeah.
One of the biggest, I guess, causes of anxiety is like being able to get through the class. How you depending on the individual, like your study habits and like your time management, like how are you going to be able to get through this class, And a lot of students, and a lot of the students I've always talked with, their biggest fear is kind of going through class kind of by themselves. And so you making groups and like having students meet together as like kind of like do it really helped a lot of people's like anxieties. And like actually funny enough, like the classmates that I like, the friends that I met from that class and from the groups that you made, we're all friends. We all hang out. Like last semester when we took Calc 2 together, it was just like us. We sat in like the cafeteria, like in between the math, because we had the math at 8 a.m. Which once you kind of built that community, it felt so much easier. And like it was, I don't want to say life-changing. I'm going to say it. It was life-changing. Wow. Made some friends, and we went along and had the same class together afterwards. And I remember, I think when I met you there, I was like, yeah, there's some of the students from that Calc 1 class. We're taking Calc 2 together, you know?
Yep.
And it was one of those, like a lot of students probably don't ever think about that. You know, it's just like you take the class once, you dip, and you probably never see those same students again. You just kind of got to go through another class and try to make any sort of connection through there. And some people have it easier than others, and I think that kind of, you know, making like putting people into groups and like, you know, having people interact with one another is one of those like you won't fully appreciate it until it's no longer there, because that's this semester, last semester, if I didn't have that, I think it would have been more stressful. Even if I didn't even pass your class with like a high score. I think I barely passed with like a 75. But the amount of knowledge and the amount of community, the amount of effort I put into that was like hanging out with like the classmates every day. Even after class, we would hop into like a voice chat together and talk. Like just, even if it wasn't even about the exams, it'd be just talking about like how everyone's doing, what everyone's up to, and it was one of those like, it was really nice. Like, I think your interviews actually were really like I don't know, like life changing is one way of saying it, but it was one of those like, because you forced people to get together in a group, we all got to know each other like way better as people, and we all had like a common goal of doing this, not just for a grade, but to like really, like for the grade, yes, but we had to really understand and get, you know, deep into the math, like deep into the section, and really go and try to find resources. Yeah, it was, how did you get to this answer? Because you asked questions that were like, how did you get to this answer? What did you learn from this like section? How can you kind of like see how this works out if you were to apply to this equation?
Did it disrupt your personal life? Did you have anxiety? Could you not sleep at all because of any of this?
I think there's that saying of like, diamonds are formed through like heat and pressure. And it's one of those things where yes, it was really sort of stressful, and like if you really didn't know it, you didn't know it. But it's also one of those things where like you kind of have to put in the work, or else, I mean, it just shows that you're not really putting in the work. You know, you want to be putting in the work. And like, I definitely think it was more of a, I think it was a good thing that there was a lot of pressure and a lot of like a lot of it was like down on the line, like you had to know it, because if you didn't, you just didn't know it, and you would let everyone else down. And I think the pressure of that, more or less, I think, at least from when I took Calc 1 with you, it was more beneficial than it was like detrimental. I definitely think it was definitely important.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background on Josh. He actually came to Hartnell after like failing out of MPC. He took Calc 1 at MPC enough times to where he couldn't retake it there, and he came to Hartnell to take his Calc class because he couldn't take it at MPC anymore. So not only did we get him through Calc 1, but you heard him with his testimony about Calc 2, that he was able to take Calc 2 with his same cohort of group members, and he really leaned on them to get through not just Calc 1 but Calc 2 as well. So pretty interesting story there. So this is great, or I think it's great. And so we do have some data that I wish we had more, but this is already pretty compelling. This is student learning outcomes spring 2017 versus fall 2023. So this is no interview exams and also no standards-based grading. Now Nina was doing standards-based grading. So in the 2023 data, there's two things going on. There's interview exams, which Nina was doing as well. And there's also standards-based grading. So we don't know how much of the increase in SLO performance was due to interviews versus standards-based grading. But you can see a remarkable improvement here. So we've got combinations of differentiation rules. Spring 2017 exceeds was 35%, and fall 2023 exceeds was 58%. Use derivatives to describe the graph, 31% in spring 2017 exceeded, and fall 2023, 54%. And then definite integral to find the area under a curve, 26.67% in spring 2017 versus 60% exceeded in fall 2023. You can see the decrease in does not meet the standard. So here we've got spring 2017, everyone's in the 20s or 30s. And then in fall 2023, you can see a big drop off in the percentage of students who didn't meet the standard. So pretty compelling evidence there. Again, it's not the cleanest data since we do have a mixture of different interventions, but it is, tells us that it's worth looking closer at, basically. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so sample implementations. So first of all, what interviews are not. So interview exams are not simply a student presenting their work orally. This is actually a misconception that I had to work through with one of the working group members, where they just had the students go up in front of the class and they presented a problem and everybody clapped and the students sat down. An interview is not just presenting your work orally. You want to think of it as an interactive dialogue. So you want to test the students' limits of their knowledge. You want to pepper them with questions, and through that Q&A, you're going to elucidate the course material, force that reconciliation process of like, I thought it was this. You mean it's not this? It's like, no, you gotta do this differently. Forcing that reconciliation process to happen, and forge those connections with the course content and solidify the ideas in students' minds. So, just this image over here, think of it as like a jam session. You're just gonna hang out with your students and just kick the ball around, explore the ideas, pepper them with questions, bring them along with you. It's not an interrogation. It's about using it as a formative process and helping them develop their ideas through that interactive dialogue. I started out doing individual interviews during COVID. I stole this from Nick Pasquale, who's on the working group. And so during COVID, I had Calc 3 class where I gave way more A's and B's than I thought were warranted. So it started out as like, I got to do something about this academic integrity issue that I can see is going on. And so I just did individual interviews. So I gave the students the problems in advance and then just offered pre-assigned times that students could sign up for. And then we just did an online interview over Zoom, and same format. They would present the problem, any, corrections that they needed to make it kind of, talk with them about it, and then do some follow-up questions to kind of, again, see what the extent of their knowledge was, get them to think about things differently and kind of explore the topic together. So pretty straightforward, right? One thing I like about the interview exams, like regime, is that it fits with basically any syllabus, any class design, hybrid modality, in person, online, asynchronous, like any modality, you can use interviews, right?
Yeah. So the previous slide, the questions, either questions or topics.
I give them specific questions. You could give them topics. That's a nice idea, and then just pull a random question from a given topic. So and that's one thing that we wanted to see in the working group was all the different variations of ideas on how you could implement these, and I like that. So one member of the working group, I gave the students the same exact questions that they would then be tested on in the interview. Another person in the working group, he gave them questions, but then he'd give them modified versions in the interview. So no end to the variations that you could use here. Now the group interviews, you saw in Joshua Shin's, oh yeah.
I just wanted to go back to, you said topics. Math, I think we all know is like a foreign language to our students. So when we mention a topic, it might mean one thing to one person and something else to another. So I would be really cautious about just using topics because of that. We don't, I think we want them to be, we want to help them prepare for the interviews. A little bit more descriptively. I'd be afraid of the
Having something a little more concrete that they can work on. Yeah, that's interesting.
Especially for second language learners who are now learning a third language, with math, I think that it can get a little tricky.
That's a fascinating take. Yeah, and I think there is value to having something really concrete, like you're saying, that the students can really work on. So I think of the interview problems as like, kind of like you've got a stream and you're kind of hopping across using, hop from this rock to this rock to this rock. I kind of think that's how learning happens. Is you get these like strongholds and like, okay, I understand this really well. And then because you understand that, now you can kind of explore around you a little bit. And then, okay, now I understand this really well, we can kind of explore. That's how I think of with my interviews, is like, if I can get them to know this topic really well through this problem, then it gives them footing to kind of explore the rest of the subject. Different takes from different people, so.
I said topics because, while doing my PhD, one of my professor had this exact the same thing, but he says he always tested on topics. So, of course, I hated it.
Yeah, that's so broad.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
so, yeah, he asked questions and we have to respond,
Yeah.
and based on that, he evaluates, and that's part of the grading system.
So the group interviews, this may seem a little bit what's the word?
Controversial?
Controversial, thank you, yeah. So, because it is high stakes, like Joshua was saying, diamonds are formed from heat and pressure, like it's pretty intense, right? But again, I don't think of interviews as punitive. I am not trying to grill my students to say, like, oh, you don't know this, you don't know that. It's a formative process, right? And so I think that's what makes this group format work, is that even though it is somewhat high stakes, there are multiple catches to help students kind of like, if someone's struggling, it's not going to doom the whole group. So basically what I do, pre-assign the students, I just randomly assign students because I kind of want to break up whatever existing friend groups are there, so I can kind of help spread connections, so my students get to know other students. Give the students well in advance, like weeks in advance is ideal. And then I require that my students meet weekly. I literally stand at the board, I say, group 1, tell me the day, time, location that you're going to meet. Group 2, day, time, location. I literally write it down. And then, depending on the class, sometimes I'll offer extra credit. If they take a photo, a selfie of themselves, like here we are, we're studying for our exam, I'll give them extra credit for that, just to make sure that it's happening. And then I'll give them days, times, locations, give them times that they can pick from for their interview. I bring everybody in, and then I'll randomly select a question, randomly select a problem, and then that randomly selected person and randomly selected problem, they have to present that problem. And that's, I have a 4-point grading scale. The first 3 points are the presentation. They'll get a partial credit score out of 3. And then if there's any gaps or mistakes or anything, then I give the group a chance to fix those mistakes. So the initial presentation is not the end of the story. The group can fix the mistakes, and then I average the group score with the individual score. And that's the first 3 points. But then I reserve 1 more point out of 4 to ask didactic Q&A follow-up questions, again, to kind of like help the students explore these ideas and help them think about, how much have I learned, how much do I still have to learn, and help, again, clarify the ideas. Yeah.
How many interviews do the students do in a semester?
Yeah, so I'll generally do 3, for a 16-week course.
And they only do the interviews in front of their own group, or in front of the entire class?
Just their group.
Just their group?
Yeah. Although sometimes I'll do it in the tutorial center, so sometimes other groups are sitting there like watching. And then, so,
Brian,
oh, yeah.
for the didactic Q and A after, do you predetermine that because you already know the questions you're giving them anyway, or do you try to like individualize it?
It's a mix of both. Yeah, it's a mix of both. So I ask them, I tell them easy, medium, or hard, and they get to pick. So every time they want it, every time they get another follow-up question, I'll ask them easy, medium, or hard. And then depending on that, and depending on what I know they're strong on or weak on, I can pick the relevant question.
Come up with it on the spot.
Yeah. And there's a lot of repeats. So if someone gets question 3, I'll kind of have like a little battery of follow-up questions that I can ask. But yeah, so it's more individualized. Again, trying to like build that sort of like formative development in their minds. Yeah.
So are these interviews replacing all your, more, I guess, tests traditional tests that you would give as midterms throughout the semester?
This is the first time I'm literally replacing them entirely. What I've done in the past has been an online exam on their online homework system and an interview. And both of those would count as 50 points. And so those two together would be a 100-point exam. But
And that
this
would be the
semester-
final, or that would be for each and every section that you have, module that you have in the course.
I do it on a calendar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so every month they have.
Every
they have
month,
an interview. Yeah.
wow.
Sorry, so many questions.
Oh, I know.
What points that you give them, the scores, do you have a specific rubric, or do you just like, this sounds like a 3.6?
I grade on percentage completion. So if they've completed 80% of the problem,
You have explanations in between them, right? Like,
yeah,
explain.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so, yeah,
Touch on that last bullet.
last bullet.
If students want to.
Oh, right, yeah, so this is actually kind of interesting. If students want to do an interview individually, like they aren't happy with the group interview and they want to do one to just kind of boost their grade, then what I'll do is they can do an interview and then I'll average their individual interview with their group interview, so they can average up if they want to. Grand total, I've offered that for like 3 semesters at this point. I've had a grand total of 1 student who took me up on it. So even though it is kind of like a complicated exam process with like some social dynamics and all kinds of stuff, I think it works well enough for students. And the one person who did that is just because he was like at an 89 point something and he wanted to bump it up to a 90. And so generally speaking, the need just isn't there. But I do have that like as a final catch. Yeah. Yeah, so multimodal. So basically, so going back to this quote, right? Elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning by expressing it in your own words and connecting it with what you already know. There's no known limit to how much you can learn. So that's kind of like one of the benefits of this interview exams process is it's multimodal, right? Students are learning through, they're listening to each other, they're visualizing, they're watching each other, they're experimenting with different ideas, comparing and reconciling. I think that's a really big part of this. I've said that multiple times. Creating, teaching, synthesizing, practicing, and like Rebecca Linares was saying, it's in community with others, working with tutors and working with teachers. So it's a very multimodal experience and you have a much higher chance of that elaboration process happening if you're experiencing material in all these different ways, right? Okay, so this one student, I'm sorry I didn't take it out of the data set. There is no Professor Hassan at Hartnell. We do have a Professor Hussein. He was not part of the working group. So one student was a little bit confused. I haven't taken it out, so you'll see that one student kind of bouncing around. But so preparing for the interviews was more of an active process. Now, that's in quotes, whatever it means to students is whatever it means. So unfortunately, it doesn't get any more granular than that. And I apologize, the colors may not be super clear, but you can see, this one is interesting because there's some difference depending on instructor. So Jennifer and myself, we had a similar kind of group format. And so we see really, really high active engagement in student preparation sessions. Some of the other instructors, it's a little more variable, right? But generally speaking, we do see relatively high active engagement when students are preparing.
Is this student responses or this?
Yeah, student responses.
So with 3 interviews and 5 questions each, you have to assess the entire content for the semester with 15 questions. It would seem like you have to leave out things or design questions that involve many different ideas. So how do you go about formulating what's going to be in those questions?
Yeah, so I can't, is it Nina or Jennifer? They organize their exams around the student learning outcomes. And so just being able to focus on those with the interviews means that you're going to make sure that those really fundamental skills get a lot to practice, right? So that's one way to think about it. With mine, it's what you said, it's multi-part, where the students are literally practicing multiple different things in every problem. They're complicated problems. And so the students have to use multiple skills to tackle these problems. Yeah. Because of the interview, I had to develop ways of explaining class content with models and metaphors. And again, I wish the colors were a little more clear, but you can see the vast majority of students somewhat agree, strongly agree. And what I will say is that this was one of like the central questions that I had about the project, right? Of like, are they elaborating? Are they, kind of like you're talking about that whole elaboration process. So this was really gratifying to see that, yes, the students are having to say, like Joshua was saying, like, what if you apply it in this way? What if you apply it in that way? What changes if we tweak this, right? And so we're seeing that sort of exploration happen. The interview process helped clarify relationships between topics covered in the class. So again, this one's even stronger. You can see the vast majority somewhat agree or strongly agree. High support. So this is one of the elements that I think you really have to think carefully about in an interview exams regime is you've seen how much the students have to work with each other, and they work at our tutorial center in droves. I actually have a slide. Let me just, yeah, there it is. So I don't know what this cross stuff is. I got this from the tutorial center. He had these like weird cross things on there. I don't know what those are, but you can see here, these are the 5 members of the working group. So myself, Jennifer, Leticia Contreras, Nick Pasquale, Senonina Vazquez. So this is the all-stars of people who sent the most students to the Panther. I was the highest. We had 1220 total check-ins, 113 unique students. Jennifer, 923 total check-ins amongst 110 students. Leti, 883 with 101 unique students. Nick and Senonina. And my wife tells me, well, you know, you must be a really bad teacher because everyone has to go get tutoring when they take the class. So, you know, sample student support. So like we talked about, setting up groups is like a really big part of this because you need that dynamic, the dynamic engagement between students. I personally require students to work together each week and, you know, try and build camaraderie within the study groups. And that naturally happens because they're going to spend enough time with each other. They're going to get to know each other's personalities. They're going to get to know each other's quirks, their strengths, their weaknesses, their sensitivities. So I think the camaraderie really comes in, kind of like Joshua was saying, diamonds are formed through heat and pressure. I didn't mean to use that so much in this talk, but you know, it's a really interesting idea that you're putting students into the situation where they really have to rely on each other. So you do get that camaraderie that really just naturally emerges, right? Some instructors host their office hours in the tutorial center. Jennifer and me?
No.
Okay, Jennifer. Yeah, I know Letty does as well. And so, you know, that's going to help build familiarity with the tutorial center so they feel comfortable going there and asking for help. Common places and times for groups to meet. So with my students, because I write everything down on the board, like, hey, look, everybody, these 3 groups are all meeting at the same time. You guys should go crash the party. And so I'll literally have like 10 or 15 students in the tutorial center, all jamming out on the whiteboard together. And, you know, just a really, really rich exchange. So again, don't think of interviews as a punitive interrogation, right? You want to think of them as a teaching and learning tool. So that in and of itself is a student support because you're helping them grow. You're helping them learn what they know, what they don't know, and helping refine their understanding. Making an uplifting instead of a punitive experience. And then you get to connect with the students during the interview. I've gotten to know my students so much better now because you actually get to talk with them. And so there's that. And then Letty, she had in her interviews, she would have students come individually, and if they struggled, then she would just turn it into one-on-one tutoring session. So it's like, you know, if you said, hey, everybody, you should come to office hours. Everyone would say, yes, I should. And then you wouldn't get anyone. So here, you force them to come in, you're going to talk to them about what they know, what they don't know. And guess what? If they're struggling, bam, office hours right there, right? So all kinds of different ways you can support students. I'm sure there's other things that I'm not including here, but it is really an important part of the interview process because it is very stressful for them, right?
One of my students actually said, this is like office hours, kind of, isn't it? So like, I was like, yeah, I'm tricking you into coming in for tutoring.
Yeah. Okay, more time with study groups. So again, some variation between instructors. Yeah.
I don't understand the percentages. It looks like the 100% is just that brown, and then I'm wondering how it what really mean what those percentages.
Yeah, basically the redder they are, the higher the percentage. And I know it's hard to tell. Maybe we could lower some of
But
the.
it's between, like I'm on the instructor.
Right, yeah, exactly. So these are the I should have explained that, sorry. These are the instructors. And so, this is myself here. And so the darker these are, the lower the percentage, and then the lighter these are, the higher the percentage. So each row is a different instructor.
And then, so what are those neutral?
Yeah, strongly
as-
disagree,
Oh, I
somewhat
see, okay,
disagree,
okay, okay. I
neutral,
see.
somewhat agree, and
Okay.
strongly agree. This is interesting. The stress from the interviews caused conflict between classmates. Vast majority of students strongly disagree, and I think it's exactly what you were seeing in the testimonials. It's the opposite. They really connect with each other, and they rely on each other and really come to connect. Our class had well-organized preparation sessions for our interviews, so the scale here changes. So not challenging, minimally challenging, somewhat challenging, extremely challenging. And so most students found some meaningful preparation activities that they could do. I think there's a lot of work here that we can do to make sure that students know how to prepare for interviews. They didn't find it too difficult to figure out something to do. But I think this is one place where we could really explore interviews and kind of make sure that we're giving them really productive preparation strategies. And that's it. So what time is it? How long do we have? 3:40? Okay, so yeah, we do have time for questions. Yeah.
So I had talked to a faculty member about something similar to this, and their immediate reaction was, that would take too much time. So I would love to know from you all who have done this, how it has shifted your time, your workload.
Do you guys wanna?
I mean, it does take time, but doing interviews in groups, it cuts down, right? So if you have 40 students and you have groups of 4 to 5, that's really only 10 interviews. They're probably about half an hour each, so about 5 hours. And if you canceled your office hours during that week and just said this is, you know, interview week, we're gonna have interviews instead of office hours. It doesn't end up being that much more time. And you're done grading.
Yeah.
There's no grading afterwards.
I mean, when I hand grade exams right now, I swear it is the most archaic torture that, I mean, so yeah, with interviews, the grading is all live and it's very, very like uplifting. Like you get to connect with your students. So the grading becomes enjoyable, you know, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So in your earlier slides, you told us about the testing levels and 5 months techniques and the protégé effect. Do you tell that to the students to motivate what you're doing?
I haven't actually talked with them too much about that. And it's come up since giving this talk in multiple places that it could be really compelling for the students. So I actually haven't done that and they've just kind of taken my word for it. But I think communicating like, hey, there's a reason that I'm doing this could be really helpful. I think most people get it by the end. Now, we do have like in the data set, you see some strongly disagree, like, no, I thought this was terrible. Don't ever do this to me again. You know, so there are some students, but most students really get it by the end. Yeah.
I have a couple of things. First, I want to say this is really
Thank you.
so smart and so clearly presented. And it's just, it'll be really exciting. I have a comment and a question. Comment, there's two concepts that this makes me think about that may buttress or flank the use of elaboration and the protege theory. And one is the notion of social pedagogy. And Randy Bass did some interesting elaborations on that. And thinking about the role of social pedagogy in the ways like the group functions here. And and communication and group problem solving. That might be interesting for you to think about.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down for
Yeah.
sure. Social pedagogy.
Yeah, I think that is a key piece of this. And the other that it makes me think about is reflection. And the ways in which what you're prompting here is a reflective process in which students are integrating their what the new knowledge that they're acquiring with their prior knowledge and then having to act on that. So you put those two together and kind of you get reflection and community. It is an interesting concept to play with. So that I share. The question I have is thinking about this as this really exciting thing that you and your colleagues are doing, and it's great, and there's so many things in the room. What are the possibilities for extending this at Hartnell? Having this be something that moves from being, this is a few of you, to something that is, okay, this is the way we work. And what are you thinking about in that way?
Right. Well, it's funny because Allison and I were talking earlier today, and we traditionally have graded students by, like we're talking about, you have their exams and you go line by line and you figure out what they've done right and what they've done wrong. There's no recourse for the students. You can't get into their minds because they've written it down hours before, and you literally just have to read between the lines to figure out what they're trying to say. And then you give them a score and they look at it and they're sad. And they, but with interviews, it's a dialogue, and it's like, what could be more natural than to just talk with students about what they know and what they don't know, right? So in terms of like how I see this like rolling out, I do think this is like the very beginning, and I think it shows a lot of potential. I'm a little bit biased, but I think it shows a lot of potential. And in terms of the work we're doing at Hartnell, I've presented multiple times on this, and I'm going to continue to present. And what I'm finding, no surprise, is that there's some teachers who are ready to jump on board, and others who say, I've got my systems ready, and which is not to say that they haven't done like amazing work and their systems work, but there's like, I feel like there's this whole other level that they could be teaching to. And so just continue to get the message out there, and just communicate these results.
I think it's interesting.
Before we take the next question, I wanted to make a plug for the evaluation for those of you who can multitask. If you just go to Google and fill out this survey, it's really helpful for Learning Lab. And it's also helpful to get provide feedback for presenters too. So if you do that, that would be really wonderful. But there is a couple more minutes for questions.
Great.
I don't know, Anna, did you have a question? Yeah, you raised your hand
I
before.
just wanted to ask about, do you ever include proofs in your exam questions?
I do.
You do?
Yeah, not everybody does, but I actually do integrate some basic proofs into my calc classes. Yeah.
Thank you.
So my question is, are you thinking about doing downstream analysis of how your students are performing? Have you done that?
I
would love to see that data.
That, yeah, absolutely.
Because that's the proof in the pudding.
That's right.
That then could convince others that you're not, first of all, harming any of your students.
Yeah.
And potentially are strengthening their performance downstream.
Absolutely. That's that wasn't part of our research sort of like objectives this time around, but that's the next thing that I want to look at.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
I agree. Irvin.
Oh, yeah. Just like how much do you help the students in the interview, and like what does a failed interview look like?
Yes. Okay. I do help students. Basically, the idea is they get stuck somewhere. I at least want to see the rest of what you can do. And so I'll work them through whatever they're stuck on. And then if they can keep going, then again, I grade on like a percentage basis. So if they got 75% of it without my help, they get 75% of the credit. And so it's basically, I will help them, and then I let them run as far as they can until I need to help them again. And whatever percentage they're able to complete on their own is, the percentage that they get. A failed interview, it's stressful. I'm not going to lie. And that's another part of the work that I think we still need to do is kind of like Frank was saying, like, are we potentially going to harm someone? And the answer is, every testing modality, you have the potential to harm someone. And so this, I think, is much more, the students are in a much more vulnerable position, and that's what makes it more challenging. I'll just be honest, I don't think everyone is cut out to do interview exams. I think you really have to have the right mindset, and you have to, again, think of it not as a punitive exercise, and it's a formative exercise, and you want to make that clear to students and support them. And so, in a failed interview, you just really have to tread very carefully, encourage the students, try and help them keep their head up, and give them whatever credit you're able to give them. And then you can, like I talked about with Letty, they failed the interview. She literally just turned it into a tutorial session right then and there, right? So, like there's more work to do basically, and it takes experience. And the more of those you get through, the more you are gonna learn those tricks and you know.
And like there's the mastery base where they can have a follow-up interview.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like average their scores, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was to say that, Jennifer and I have used standards-based grading along with interviews. So a failed interview, I don't help my students a whole lot during the interview because they really need to be able to explain the problem. So if they cannot explain it, I tell them it's okay, turn it into a tutoring session, you'll come back next week. And so it's not the end.
So you had a lot of examples of students really liking it. Can you give us one example of somebody, a student who doesn't like this at all and what they're saying?
Yeah, so actually, we had a student this semester who, he or she, I don't know who it was, they took the survey like 4 times. And in the comments, they said, no more interviews. And then took it again, yeah, they just said no more interviews. So I wish they had, given us a little more to work with. But there were some issues between where there were some conflicts. And so some common feedback was, I felt that it was stressful to have everyone's grade depending on how one person does. And that's part of the design, but it's also kind of like one of the weaknesses as well. So it's a challenge. That's why I have so many safeguards built in. I don't think the students are really gonna appreciate those safeguards though, if they have a group mate who's floundering and is really struggling. So it's tough, but that's one of the things that they're a little bit like, not.
Imagine one of the students may not be able to make the practice sessions because.
Yeah, and so with.
Attendance.
Yeah, and so that's why I'll try and get the problems out as early as possible, so they have lots and lots of time to prepare. But there are situations like that where the student has attended like 1 or 2 prep sessions. And in that case, I'll say, okay, I'll have you guys interview separately and I'll just work with the student individually. But that requires communication, and that's gonna be hit or miss sometimes, where you might have a group come in and you don't know that this one person has only gone to 1 prep session and then they get chosen, right? So
the other people cannot help.
for the initial presentation, right, it's just that person individually. And then after they presented, then the group gets to chip in and say, oh, fix this, fix that. And this gap, you need to do this. And so it's, I'm sure there's lots of different ways that you could design that so that, if you wanted to like phone a friend or something, right? Lots of creative ideas that you could do there.
So actually, I misunderstood then. So one student is randomly chosen from the group, and their presentation is going to be for everybody's grade?
Sort of.
In the group? So you're not actually taking each and every person and give them a separate question.
Correct.
And then somehow averaging it.
Right, yeah,
Wow.
but that's something you could do, actually. Give everyone one problem and then take the average of how well they do.
Because I didn't realize that just one person was chosen randomly and everybody else got the same, right?
It sounds like.
Yeah.
The other group can chip in, so there is.
Right,
Yeah.
right, but still, then it's difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then there's the follow-up questions as well, so it's kind of another buffer. If they struggled with the presentation, you still have that Q&A follow-up. That's open to the way I do it, that's open to the whole group and everyone can chip in and give their thoughts. So it's basically, like I said, multiple safeguards to help people walk away feeling like they got to demonstrate their knowledge, Yeah, what else?
Do you keep the same groups the whole semester, or you shuffle
I
them,
do.
or what if there's a student who wants a different group for whatever reason?
Interesting, yeah, that's another communication issue. I haven't actually had that happen where someone approaches me and says, hey, I want to change groups. Maybe there is some tension out there that I'm not picking up on. You did see the results in the survey, though, that the vast majority of students said no, the conflict between classmates was not an issue, right? So I think if those issues are happening, they're relatively rare and the data kind of supports that.
I'm thinking it may not be a personal conflict, maybe they just want to be in a group that's
students who.
they're gonna get more out of it. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't traditionally switched groups. I really want the students to get to know the students in their group really well. But yeah, another variation that you can kind of toy with.
I just want to make a quick plug. Learning Lab funded a project, some years ago, it closed, but it was through Butte College, and it was all on the biology of learning and applying the science of learning to inform successful setting strategies. Really interesting. There's a whole module, I think an entire course on it. So you might really find it interesting. I mean, you're interested in like, neurological basis. Yeah, and the thing is, this project, students learn about the brain function and how that affects learning, and they improve their own setting habits, and it was really awesome.
I like
It is, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really great. So it was through, you can look it up on the Learning Labs website. There's a search function for our past projects. It's out of Butte College. I think it was the only one we funded out of Butte. Anyway, check it out.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.